The US government concluded in 2021 that directed energy weapons did not cause Havana syndrome, then immediately passed a law authorizing millions in compensation for victims of directed energy weapons. So the weapon simultaneously does not exist and also owes you money, which is either quantum physics or a legal fiction. Either way, someone is getting paid for imaginary injuries from imaginary weapons, and the checks are very real. At first, the reports were dismissed. Stress, fatigue, maybe tinnitus. But the complaints persist. Multiple technicians, different locations, same phenomenon. Someone suggests testing a theory. They hand the technicians earplugs, industrial-grade hearing protection. The technicians put them in, sealing off the ear canal completely, and they still hear the clicks, still hear the buzzes, which should have been impossible, because sound requires air molecules vibrating your eardrum. If you block the ear canal, you block the sound, unless the sound is not traveling through air at all, unless it is being generated somewhere inside. The technicians were not imagining things. They were receiving things, like a radio, except they never asked for the subscription. Now here is where it gets uncomfortable. Fast forward to 1953. US security technicians are sweeping the American embassy in Moscow for bugs, except they find something that is not standard at all, a microwave signal, directed at the embassy, specifically the upper floors where the most sensitive work happens. The power density is initially estimated at 5.0 microwatts per square centimeter. So that is approximately 100 times the Soviet safety standard, which, if you are keeping score, is roughly the radiation safety equivalent of setting someone's alarm clock to cardiac arrest. Someone is beaming microwaves at American diplomats. On purpose. For hours at a time. The kind of focus that requires someone to show up to work every day, point the device, and go home for dinner. That is not interference. That is a job description. And when analysts examine it more closely, they notice something else. It is modulated, pulsed, which means it is carrying information, or triggering something biological. By 1961, a neuroscientist named Alan H. Frey published a paper titled Human Auditory System Response to Modulated Electromagnetic Energy. Frey confirms that the human head can act as a receiver for pulsed radio frequency energy. Not metaphorically, literally. Your skull is a biological antenna. Congratulations. Evolution spent millions of years perfecting your brain, and it turns out you are also a transistor radio. Very efficient design. The mechanism is called thermoelastic expansion. When a pulse of microwave energy hits brain tissue, it causes rapid microscopic heating, approximately 1/1,000,000th of a degree Celsius per pulse. That heating generates a pressure wave. The cochlea detects that pressure wave. Your brain interprets it as sound, but the sound is not entering through your ear canal. It is being created inside your head. Frey demonstrates this effect can be induced at distances of hundreds of feet. Not a massive installation, a relatively small device, portable, concealable, the kind of device you could fit in a briefcase, which is either very convenient or very concerning, depending on whether you are the one holding the briefcase. Which means by 1961, the scientific community knows for certain that you can make someone hear things that are not there, remotely, without their consent. If someone told you they could hear radar, you would probably suggest they see a psychiatrist. The technicians did exactly that. The doctors found nothing wrong. So who's crazy now? Back in Moscow, the US government is not ignoring the problem. In 1965, the White House launched Project TUMS, Technical Unidentified Moscow Signal. By October, RARPA issued a memo titled Justification Memorandum for Project Pandora. The memo classifies the research into radiation effects on man, specifically potential degradation of central nervous system function, not jamming equipment, degrading brains. In 1966, the State Department quietly launched the Moscow Viral Study. Officially, it is a health initiative. Embassy personnel are told they are being tested for viral exposure. In reality, they are collecting blood samples to test for chromosome breaks caused by radiation. And they do not tell a single person what they are actually testing for. Nothing says, we care about your health, quite like secretly testing your blood for chromosome breaks while telling you it is just a flu check. Very diplomatic. And then they started experimenting on monkeys. Lad between 1965 and 1970, Project Bizarre is running at Walter Reed. The objective is straightforward. Irradiate rhesus monkeys with microwave energy similar to the Moscow signal. See if the radiation affects decision-making and motor function. Because when you want to know if invisible radiation scrambles brains, step 1 is apparently finding some monkeys and scrambling their brains. Science. The monkeys are trained to perform tasks, simple puzzles, pattern recognition, coordination tests. Then the microwaves are turned on. The monkeys start making mistakes. Tasks they performed flawlessly hundreds of times suddenly became impossible. The animals seem confused, disoriented, as if they cannot trust their own brains anymore. The results are documented. Pronounced behavioral effects, performance decrements. But there is a problem. The power levels used in the experiments are significantly higher than the revised readings of the Moscow signal. Here is where the math stops adding up. On September 25, 1967, a CIA analyst issued a correction. The Moscow signal is not as strong as initially estimated. Later analysis revises it down to 5 microwatts per square centimeter. That is 1/10 the original estimate. Except the monkey experiments that showed brain damage were conducted at power levels higher than the corrected reading. So either the correction is accurate and the experiments are useless, or the correction is a lie and the experiments are terrifying. Pick one. There is no third option where everyone is doing great science and also telling the truth. That door is closed. The official story shifts. The signal is weaker than we thought. No health risk. But the research does not stop, and the proposals get darker. On April 21, 1969, Project Pandora held a meeting. The minutes are eventually declassified. They contain a proposal to move from primates to human subjects, specifically, unwitting subjects from Fort Detrick. The memo also includes a phrase that should raise every red flag: shielding of testicles. You know your experiment is ethically bulletproof when the minutes include the phrase unwitting subjects and a reminder to protect the testicles. It really inspires confidence. Whether it was implemented is unclear. The files that would answer that question were destroyed in 1973. Convenient. In July 1969, Project Big Boy was initiated. ARPA observers board the USS Saratoga to compare the health of crewmen exposed to radar microwaves against crewmen below deck. The results are officially deemed negative. But here is the catch. Negative results do not get classified. Yet the Big Boy documentation is buried under layers of restricted access, because nothing screams totally normal health study quite like classifying the results at a level typically reserved for nuclear launch codes. By 1970, Project Pandora was officially terminated. The final report concludes that conclusive evidence of behavioral modification is lacking. Not microwaves do not affect behavior. Just, we lack conclusive evidence. It is the research equivalent of, I am not saying your house is haunted. I am just saying we heard screaming and all the doors slammed shut and now the priest will not return our calls. And buried in earlier memos are phrases like potential for disrupting the behavior patterns of military or diplomatic personnel. That is not the language of a theory. That is the language of capability. If you want to see more cases where the official story crumbles under scrutiny, hit subscribe. Then, in 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms orders every MKUltra file destroyed. Not archived, destroyed. Subproject 119 was explicitly aimed at activation of human behavior by remote means. Remote activation, not influenced, activation. When Helms orders the destruction, the majority of MKUltra records are incinerated. No trial, no oversight, just gone. And destroying the evidence does not make the experiments disappear. It just makes the denials more suspicious. When someone burns the recipe, you do not assume they were making cupcakes. By 1976, the US government is still publicly insisting the Moscow signal poses no health risk. Meanwhile, the State Department is quietly installing aluminum window screens at the embassy. Heavy-duty shielding designed to block microwave transmissions. Ask yourself, when has your government ever installed shielding to protect you from something harmless? That same year, a top-secret memorandum landed on President Ford's desk. It acknowledges the radiation may be for activation or interrogation of audio devices implanted in the embassy. That theory would be plausible, except for one problem. If the signal is only for powering devices, it does not need to be modulated, but the Moscow signal is modulated, pulsed, which means the memo's explanation does not fit the evidence. It is an excuse to wear the costume of analysis. In October 1976, another discrepancy emerged. The U.S. safety standard for microwave exposure is set at 10 milliwatts per square centimeter. The Soviet standard is set at 10 microwatts per square centimeter. That is a 1,000 to 1 difference. Researchers demonstrate that specific modulation frequencies, around 16 Hz, can alter the bonding of calcium ions in brain tissue. If you disrupt calcium bonding, you disrupt how neurons fire. And you can do it without heating the tissue, without the person feeling anything. So either the Soviets were overly cautious about invisible brain-altering radiation, or the Americans were remarkably chill about it. Spoiler. One of these countries had a history of being extremely chill about radiation safety. It was not the Soviets. If you worked at the Moscow embassy in 1970, you were a lab rat. You just didn't know it yet. Fast forward 40 years. December 2016, Havana, Cuba. CIA officers and State Department personnel are experiencing something bizarre. A sudden onset of localized pressure in the head, accompanied by a directional piercing noise. When they turn their heads, the sound moves with them. When they leave the room, it stops. Cognitive dysfunction sets in. Vertigo. Tinnitus. Victims describe the sounds in visceral terms. Grinding metal, piercing squeals. One officer describes it as feeling like being inside a beam. The noise is directional. When victims move their heads, the sound moves with them. That is not tinnitus. That is targeting. By 2018, the University of Pennsylvania conducted neurological assessments. The neurologists use a specific term, immaculate concussion, which is medical terminology for we have no idea what hit you, but your brain definitely lost the fight. Brain network disorders consistent with mild traumatic brain injury. Except these people have not been in car crashes. There is no impact, just brain damage. The brain equivalent of finding your car keyed in the parking lot, except the parking lot is your skull and the key is physics. By late 2018, identical symptoms appeared at the U.S. consulate in Guangzhou, China. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo confirms the clinical consistency. Same presentation, different continents, same weapon. For years before Havana, online communities of self-described targeted individuals, TIS, had been reporting identical symptoms, directional voices, burning sensations, pressure in the skull. Many were diagnosed with delusional disorder. Then, in 2016, CIA officers in Havana started reporting the exact same symptoms. Suddenly, the delusion had a medical study from the University of Pennsylvania and a National Academies investigation. Turns out the difference between a conspiracy theorist and a whistleblower is about $20,000 worth of neuroimaging equipment and a government paycheck. But the mechanism was still unclear. The Frey effect requires high peak power. Yet during the Havana attacks, no massive power spikes were recorded, which means either the equipment was not sensitive enough, or the signal was below detection thresholds, or the weapon uses a mechanism beyond the Frey effect. And then there is the patent. In 2002, the U.S. Patent Office grants patent 6470214. The title is Method and Device for Implementing the Radio Frequency Hearing Effect. You cannot patent something that does not work. Patent examiners do not approve ideas written on napkins. They approve devices that function, which means someone walked into that office with a working prototype of a voice in your head machine, demonstrated it, and walked out with a government-issued monopoly on the technology. Sleep well. On June 2018, the wife of a U.S. Embassy staffer heard the sounds and looked outside. She saw a van speeding away. Analysts note that a microwave dish, compact, directional, could easily fit inside a commercial van. The perfect crime. Except you are not stealing anything. You are just reorganizing someone's neurons without asking. Much more polite. By 2019, Canadian diplomats who served in Havana underwent neuroimaging studies. The results show significant spatial memory impairment, degradation of fiber tracts in the fornix and corpus callosum. In 2020, the National Academies released their report. Directed pulsed radiofrequency energy is the most plausible mechanism for the observed injuries. Not possible. Not likely. Plausible, which means they cannot rule it out even if they wanted to. And then the cleanup begins. In 2021, the Jason Advisory Group concludes, it is highly unlikely that microwaves or ultrasound caused the symptoms. Instead, they attribute the sounds to crickets, specifically the Indies short-tailed cricket. Except the Jason report admits, in writing, that they never examined the medical records of the intelligence officers who were most severely injured. So they identified the sound without talking to the victims. That is, deciding your house is not on fire because the smoke detector batteries are dead. If someone breaks into your house, you don't blame the weather. But if someone breaks into your skull, apparently you blame crickets. On October 2021, President Biden signed the Havana Act into law. It authorizes financial compensation for victims of anomalous health incidents, AHI. But the executive branch officially denies a weapon exists. Congress authorized payments for injuries caused by a weapon that officially doesn't exist. So it's the geopolitical equivalent of your insurance company covering alien abduction. Generous, but raises some questions. On January 2022, the CIA released its interim assessment. Their finding: the majority can be explained by environmental causes or pre-existing conditions. It is unlikely that a foreign actor is conducting a sustained campaign. The pattern repeats. Initial alarm, serious research, disturbing findings. Then a pivot. It is the institutional equivalent of nothing to see here, please disperse. Except the here is inside your skull and dispersing is not really an option. But the evidence accumulates. And then the Russians showed up. Members of Russia's GRU, Russian Military Intelligence, Unit 29155, an elite sabotage unit, are placed at the locations of multiple AHI incidents, days before, on cell phone data, travel records. The timeline is undeniable, and some members received state awards for work on non-lethal acoustic weapons, which is a very specific thing to get an award for unless your job involves making people hear things that are not there, in which case apparently the Russian government throws you a parade. And then there is Vitaly Kovalev, a Russian electronics engineer, arrested in the United States on suspicion of espionage. During his FBI interrogation, the agent conducting the interview suddenly develops Havana syndrome symptoms. Mid-interrogation. The session stops. Kovalev is never questioned again. In March 2023, new studies were published by the National Institutes of Health. The findings claim no significant differences in MRI brain scans between AHI patients and control groups. This contradicts the 2019 University of Pennsylvania study. Critics point out the timing issue. The NIH studies examined patients months after exposure, chronic phase. The Penn study examined patients shortly after exposure, acute phase. Brain injuries heal. But the NIH study makes headlines. No evidence of harm. Victims are overreacting. Meanwhile, the CIA awards one officer the Exceptional Service Medal for selfless service, despite being targeted by unknown forces. Targeted. That is the word they used. You do not get a medal for being targeted by unknown forces. You get a medal for being shot at by something very specific that everyone is pretending does not exist. It is a participation trophy for surviving a cover-up. Drop your theory in the comments, because the official explanation definitely has some gaps. Freedom of Information Act requests force the NSA to release previously classified documents. One statement, dated 2014, acknowledges that a foreign power built a weapon designed to bathe a target's living quarters in microwaves, specifically to cause nervous system damage. 2014, 4 years before Havana. The NSA knew. They did not warn the diplomats who were later attacked. So let us review the current state of the technology. Not theoretical, operational. The active denial system, a DS, fully deployed. 95 GHz millimeter wave emitter capable of inducing intolerable heating sensation from 700 yards away. That just means it will not kill you. It will make you wish it had. The CHAMP missile, Counter Electronics High Power Microwave Advanced Missile Project. It is an EMP with wings. The Air Force has a missile that turns off entire city blocks. Just so we are all on the same page about what is operationally possible in 2025. Then there is the research, not classified, published. In 2021, scientists demonstrate wireless neuromodulation using magnetothermal nanoparticles, engineered particles that respond to external magnetic fields. When exposed to the field, neurons activate. No implants. The paper is published in Nature, which means it passed peer review. Multiple scientists read this paper about remote-controlled neurons, nodded approvingly, and said, yes, this seems fine, publish it. Academia is wild, so the next time someone tells you that mind control is science fiction, remind them it's peer-reviewed science fiction. Research also indicates that low-power microwaves can entrain brainwaves. If you can force alpha waves to sync with an external signal, you can theoretically alter cognitive states. Multiple labs have replicated it, which is science speak for, we do not know why this works, but it definitely works, and we have done it multiple times just to be sure. Now, here is the problem no one wants to discuss. If you experience these symptoms, directional sounds, cognitive disruption, there is no diagnostic code, which is the bureaucracy's way of saying, if we don't have a form for it, it didn't happen. So doctors default to the closest match. Delusional disorder, paranoid schizophrenia. The clinical gap leaves victims vulnerable. They get labeled mentally ill. Employment becomes difficult. Credibility evaporates. And there is no legal framework to address it. Because there is no international treaty banning directed energy neuroweapons. Chemical weapons are banned. Biological weapons are banned. Even blinding lasers are banned. But microwave neuroweapons, not mentioned. The Geneva Conventions have very strong opinions about mustard gas, but nothing about making your brain receive FM radio without your consent. Priorities, which means any nation-state can develop and deploy these weapons without violating international law. You cannot prove who attacked you. And civilians? Completely unprotected. No detection infrastructure. No legal recourse. In recent testimony before Congress, intelligence officials discussed non-human intelligence, NHI, ontological shock. If that testimony is credible, and they were under penalty of perjury, then the list of potential suspects just expanded beyond nation-states. So now, we are considering the possibility that the voices in people's heads might be from something that is not human, which is either the most insane thing anyone has ever said to Congress under oath, or the most honest. Hard to say which is more disturbing. Maybe the weapons are human, Russian, Chinese, American black projects. Maybe they are not. Either way, people are being targeted, brains are being damaged, and the official response is denial. So what is the explanation? Mass psychogenic illness? Except brain scans do not lie. An MRI doesn't have a mass hysteria setting. It just shows the damage. You cannot imagine fiber tract degradation in your corpus callosum. That requires physics, but not psychology. Crickets. It explains the sound. It does not explain the brain damage. Crickets do not follow you. Beams do. Environmental factors? Possible for some cases, not for all. You are not looking at four separate coincidences involving different environmental toxins that all happen to cause the exact same directional auditory phenomenon and identical brain damage. That is not how coincidences work. That is how weapons work. You are carrying a device right now that can track your location, record your conversations, and monitor your biometrics. You paid for it. What makes you think a government could not aim something at you that you did not buy? So, if this technology has existed since the 60s, proven by Frey, weaponized by black projects, patented in 2002, where are the attacks? There is no treaty banning it. There is no detection infrastructure, so either every nation independently decided not to use it, or they are using it, and we are just not seeing the evidence. Pick the explanation that sounds less like a fairy tale. Or maybe the attacks are not rare. Maybe they are happening constantly, and we are categorizing them as mental illnesses. The clinical gap ensures victims have no recourse. The lack of diagnostic codes ensures the data is never collected. And the official denials ensure the public never connects the dots. It is the perfect crime, except it is not a crime because there is no law against it, which might actually be worse. If this investigation disturbed your reality, share it. Let us make people uncomfortable together. Misery loves company, and so does existential dread. Here is what we know for certain. In 1947, technicians heard sounds that should not exist. In 1961, Frey proved human heads are biological radios. Congratulations on the free subscription, by the way. You never signed up for it, but your skull came with the hardware pre-installed. In 1965, the US government launched classified projects to study microwave effects on behavior. In 1973, Helms destroyed the evidence. Nothing says innocent research quite like a bonfire of documentation. In 2002, the Patent Office granted a patent for transmitting voices into heads. In 2016, diplomats in Havana reported being targeted. In 2020, the National Academies concluded directed RF energy was the most plausible cause. In 2021, the government blamed crickets while paying compensation. So the cricket is simultaneously guilty and imaginary, which makes it either Schrödinger's insect or the world's most expensive scapegoat. In 2022, the CIA said it was unlikely a foreign actor, while awarding medals for being targeted. The contradictions are not bugs, they are features. Acknowledge just enough to avoid liability. Deny just enough to avoid panic. Classify just enough to avoid accountability. It is a carefully choreographed dance where everyone pretends not to notice the music is coming from inside their heads. And the final observation. The Moscow signal irradiated the US Embassy for 23 years. The State Department knew for at least 17 of those years. They measured it, they studied it. They secretly tested the blood of the people working inside. And they did not tell those people until 1976. That is 17 years of, your health is our top priority, while actively using you as a radiation test subject. Really builds trust. If they hid it then, what makes you think they would tell you now? So if this investigation disturbed your reality, hit subscribe, because we are just getting started. Share this with someone who still thinks the government tells them everything. Drop your theory in the comments because the official explanation definitely has some gaps. And remember, the difference between a conspiracy theorist and a whistleblower is about $20,000 worth of neuroimaging equipment and a government paycheck. See you in the next one.